We are counting down to Daytona. I'm JB Buno with the one, the only, the legend himself, Dan Lucas. Dan, I'll tell you, I have goosebumps. You know, the legend talk, of course, you know, we have fun here on the show, but look at the man here in the middle of the screen. That is a real, nothing against you, Dan, but now we're talking about a living legend in the world of NASCAR, really the world of racing. We're talking about Richard Petty.
This is this was a treat. You see a few of these people in your lifetime if you get into this business, and what a wonderful afternoon I got to spend with the King at his museum, which is in Randleman, North Carolina, level cross, literally where he was born. There's a house right next to it where his parents lived, and the museum is his actual, used to be the garage, the shop for the team back in the 1950s and 60s. But I got a chance to sit down with the King, and I had to keep it related to the Daytona 500 because we could have gone about 10 hours on this thing with him when it comes to racing, but he loves Daytona, and let's take a listen. You've seen Daytona go from the ground up, literally. So when you go into Daytona International Speedway, what goes through your mind? Is it this cathedral of racing, or is it, you know, I remember when this was dirt?
Well, I think you go back to the first time you was there, and then you see all the improvements and all the changes. They've changed everything but the racetrack, and they put different services on that. But everything down there, I mean, when we first went in down there, it was like 10 miles to the, and when you went through the tunnel, I mean, there was nothing in the infield. And you could see the big bank over there looked like a wall. And, you know, 21-year-old kid, it was fantastic. But now you go back at 81 and see all the changes it's made, and it's just like a different world, completely different world.
When you go back to that time, and like you're saying, 21-year-old kid, he's just looking around, taking it in. Are you amazed that it's gotten to where it is? The sport, the venue, just everything about it.
Yeah. When we first went down there, that was the biggest thing going on, and racing had just been going on for like 10 years, the Cup Series, and you know, we thought we was head of the game. You know what I mean? I mean, we was the pinnacle of that deal, and you know, then you see all the changes that's been made, you know, every 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and then the redoing of everything, grandstands and stuff this year, the past year. It's just made a stadium out of it. When we first went there, they just had some grandstand seats sitting over there, and that was it. And but it was still, Darlington was our only big track at that particular time, and it was so much bigger than you could put the whole racetrack and everything inside Daytona from Darlington, and it was just it just blew your mind. And now you go back, it still blows my mind because of the improvements and stuff they made.
All the years and the success you've had at Daytona, I know you've been asked a million times, but is there one that you can say, yep, that was mine, buddy? That was, of all the wins and the big moments you've had, is there one out there that's always going to stand for that?
You know, the first super speedway race I won was in '64 at Daytona. I mean, that was the biggest thing up to that time. But then you come back in '66 and win again, so '64 kind of, you know, gets smaller. You know what I mean? Then you come back and win some more races and stuff. The big deal at Daytona basically was in '84, winning the 200th race in front of the President of the United States on the last green flag lap. I mean, you know, what else could you ask for?
I got goosebumps. I don't know about you, but also, let's just talk about this, Dan, really quick before we break down the interview here with Richard Petty. How cool is that museum? That is the Richard Petty Museum in Randleman, North Carolina. Look at the video here on your screen, everybody.
I've been in a few of these things where it's one person's museum and a couple of golf museums and that, and they're neat. This is the most unbelievable collection I've ever seen. And obviously he's put it together himself. We were looking at actual winning cars from the races. There were no replicas in there. They had crashed cars in one wing of the museum. This guy has stories. He could go on and on and on. And let me tell you, this museum, it's in Randleman, North Carolina. And when I say it's off the beaten path, it is off the beaten path. It is something that, it's like a quest. If you're a fan of the sport, a fan of Richard Petty, to get to. And if you go to this museum, you may run into him. I asked him, do you ever talk to people who come in here? He goes, all the time. All the time. I go out, I say hello, and he told me he's met people from Europe, Asia, Brazil, all over the world come to Randleman just to see this museum. It is very cool.
When it comes to Richard Petty, I mean, we're talking about a guy who might have more stories in the Bible. I mean, this is a guy who has been around the track, so to speak, more than one time. Just a lot of great stories here from a living legend that you actually had the privilege of sitting down and speaking with.
One of the stories he told me about, and he won the Daytona 500 7 times, and you heard him say that in 1964, that was his first Daytona win. That meant a lot to him. And then he won at Daytona in 1984. That was the mid-season race in July. That wasn't the 500. But he did win the 500 7 times. And he was a part of one of the most historic moments in NASCAR history, 1979, the Daytona 500. He was nowhere near the front at the final lap. There were two drivers, Donnie Allison and Cale Yarborough. They were 1 and 2. It was a runaway win. Richard Petty was in a group of cars battling for third. Well, entering turn 3, Allison and Yarborough came together, crashed. They went off to the infield. And here comes Richard Petty battling for what he thinks is third place. And he told me, he goes, I glanced over and I saw those guys. They go, they're both in the infield. This is for the win. So he cruises around the turn 4 into the tri over there and wins the Daytona 500. Not known at that time. He didn't realize at the time that the national broadcast, they saw him crossing the line, and that was great. They were on Allison and Yarborough still in the infield over in turn 3, fist fighting. And by the time the crews got out, by the time he went around the track after he had won the race, there was a huge crowd of people around there, people trying to separate the two. It became
or watching the fist fight, maybe just want to get a good spot.
Okay, that is the moment, JB, that the modern day NASCAR folks credit for creating its popularity nationwide. It happened to come on a weekend where there was a massive blizzard in the Northeast, so a lot of people were snowed in. There was nothing going on TV, no major events except the Daytona 500. So people, man, it's on, whatever. All of a sudden you see these guys fighting.
Right.
And that's what it's known for. But Richard Petty was the winner of that race.
Tradition, right? Fighting. It's now a tradition.
Now
hey,
now
listen.
we count down to it. Literally, we count down to it.
You could just call them extracurricular activities on the
Exactly.
on the course. But really, I mean, I'm curious just to know, based on your conversations in here, we see Petty shaking some hands with some people coming through the museum and stopping by to see all this vintage automobiles. It's incredible. But just the biggest difference between his era of racing and the racing of today, I'm not sure if you compared what it was like racing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s versus now racing in 2019 and what it's like for the drivers today. But it's obviously completely different.
Yeah, he raced into I want to say 1992. That was his last competitive year, and he was really a victory tour everywhere he went. He wasn't really in contention in races at that time, but he crossed over through a lot. He literally raced on the dirt in Daytona when they built the speedway, and he opened the place and won 7 times there. And all the championships and records he set, he has seen the sport advance technology-wise to where it is today. He was racing when they installed restrictor plates on these super speedways to control the speeds. He's seen it all. And I can tell you this, he's 81 years old. He always works. He never stops. When we were spending the day with him at the museum, he disappeared for a while, and I asked the handler we were with, where'd he go? Where'd Richard go? He goes, oh, he's back working on signing autographs. That's what he does. The guy never stops, makes appearances. He knows, even to this day, that hat, that mustache, those shades, that
signature
belt buckle, that is synonymous with NASCAR. He's a treasure. He is a treasure, and we need to just enjoy it while we have him here. He is a wonderful man.
Well, it was great to hear from, again, a living legend. One legend in Dan Lucas speaking to a living legend.
Far from it.
in Richard Petty. Everybody, thanks so much for being with us here on Countdown to Daytona. We have more content coming up online here in all of our shows, so be sure to follow us as we do more leading up to the Daytona 500. Take care, everybody.